Well, hi again. It's Father Alex here, host of the Godcast, author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, and vicar of St Matthew's in Burnley. Thanks for joining me again. Today's guest on the Godcast is the Right Reverend Graham Tomlin, who is the former Bishop of Kensington and who now heads up the Centre for Cultural Witness. If you enjoy this Godcast, then do please subscribe. There's a link in the bottom right hand corner, and also check out all the other interviews. There's over 130 interviews now with people from the media, from music, from comedy, and from the church as well. So something for everybody. Do take a look, and thanks for watching. But for now, I hope you enjoy this podcast with the Right Reverend Graham Tomlin. So, Bishop Graham Tomlin, it's wonderful to welcome you to the Godcast. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Alex. Very nice to see you, and good to see. Well, I can't see anybody on the YouTube, but they can all see us. But yeah, great to be with you.
Just been looking at your Twitter feed, Graham. You've been travelling quite a bit, it seems, lately. Has this been leisure, work? What's been the travel you've been up to?
No, all work really. I've been I was in the USA for just about a week a little while ago, speaking at a conference for clergy in the Diocese of Dallas, down in the south of the US. Some meetings in New York. More recently, I've been I was in Switzerland over last weekend for a conference with a whole bunch of German theologians. We've started this new thing called the Centre for Cultural Witness that I'm sure we'll talk about in time. And there's a whole kind of a way of approaching engagement with culture in Germany called public theology. A lot of German theologians are involved in that. So we were having a conversation about that. And then I was in Rome on Monday morning for talks with the Vatican, just trying to help the Roman Catholics understand what's going on in the Anglican Church and vice versa.
You find Christians different around the world, Graham, as you travel around? I mean, you've got three very different demographics there and geographical locations. Are things obviously different, or are we much the same?
I mean, yes and no, really. I mean, the great thing about traveling to different places is that sense that you have this amazing bond with people as almost as soon as you meet them when they're Christian. You have this, I guess it comes from our sort of common baptism, common faith, that even though there's so many different sort of expressions of Christian faith and the forms of worship and forms of belief vary hugely, you still sense that commonality, that connection. Which I think one of the great gifts of being a Christian, that wherever you are in the world, you can have that sense of a bond with other people. Having said that, yes, I mean, they are very different. The way Christians worship in the south of America and Dallas and Texas is very different from the way they do it in sort of Lutheran churches in Germany, or I'll be in Egypt in next month as well. So I guess they'll be worshiping in very different ways there. So yeah, there's huge variety, but you can't deny the sort of the kind of core thing that holds us together at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because there is that holds us together, and then the theology gets in the way somewhat, doesn't it? Because I was in the Holy Land this time last year, and it was lovely to embrace Christians in very deep places of history and pilgrimage. But obviously we didn't discuss theology. We didn't get life would be quite easy, wouldn't it, if that was the only rule to being a Christian?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but I wrote a book a year or two back called Navigating a World of Grace. The Promise of Generous Orthodoxy was the subtitle, and the idea was around the Nicene Creed as the kind of one thing that pretty well all Christian churches hold in common. And the remarkable thing about it is it's not it is a work of theology. It's a work of discerning what this kind of summary of the Bible in 175 words in Greek. And yet it's something that there's not a sort of bland lowest common denominator that just about no one can disagree with. It's quite a distinct sort of view of the world. It gives you a lot of scope to think and to move within. So it's a kind of broad space, but not without its limits. And it seems to be so theology sort of helps and doesn't help sometimes. It helps to bind us together in terms of something like the creed, but sometimes, as you say, some of the other questions can divide us. But
yeah, and there will be. I'm really fortunate. Lots of people who watch and listen to the Godcast aren't from a church setting, Graham. So just to give some context about yourself, your CV is quite a resume, isn't it? You've worked in numerous places in numerous roles. You've been in the Faculty of Religion of Theology at Oxford, and you obviously you were the Bishop of Kensington, and you've been the Dean of St Mellitus College, and this all started back in the 80s. Did you sometimes reflect on where it all began?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I kind of well, I grew up in a Christian family. In fact, my dad was a Baptist minister, so I didn't grow up an Anglican at all. And it's one of those homes where you were kind of, taught to pray and taught to go to church from the sort of earliest days. But I guess I hit my teenage years, and like a lot of teenagers, just decided it wasn't true. I couldn't make any sense of it at all as you kind of grew out of. I think looking back on it, I think I had a sort of childish faith that when when you hit teenage years, you think that's not good enough for you any longer. So I kind of cast it aside. I think the sad thing is many people never recover that. Many people kind of leave sort of childhood faith behind, and they never realize that there's an adult form of Christian faith that you can embrace. And so after a number of years of rather self-consciously, rather arrogantly calling myself an atheist, I kind of found my way back into well, I don't know. I say found my way. I'm not sure I did find my way. I think somehow in some strange way God drew me back into Christian faith with the help of a few Christian friends and various events and so on. And so stumblingly found myself one day thinking, yeah, maybe I am a Christian after all. And then it's so that's a bit of the story.
I mean, I didn't write this question down, but just listening to you speak, do you think it's easier to lose your faith or easier to gain your faith? What do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that people who have had some kind of Christian upbringing in their early years and who then move away from faith are more likely to come back to it than those who've never had a sort of background in Christian faith. I mean, is it to lose faith or gain it? I mean, a lot of people do lose faith for all kinds of different reasons. Some understandable, some less so. But and maybe today in our kind of culture, probably it's I think there's probably more evidence of people losing faith than gaining faith. But every now and again you see those stirrings of something going on, and I increasingly find people discovering faith again. It's one of the great things about being a bishop was just getting around and hearing the stories of people who get confirmed, and especially the story of adults who've kind of discovered Christian faith kind of against the tide, as it were, because it is a bit of against the cultural tide at the moment to find a faith as an adult. And it's fascinating to kind of hear those people who and the reasons why they kind of come back to faith. And so it does happen, and it's very, very sort of intriguing when it does, almost because it's against the tide, as it were, makes it that much more special.
I'm a member of General Synod, Graham, and people will expect me to ask a bishop certain questions. But one of the questions I'd like to ask is about the decline of numbers in the Church of England, and this maybe will tie in with your work in the Centre for Cultural Witness. The church has seen some rapid decline and is at a pretty low ebb at the moment. And I don't like to speak negatively about the institution that I'm part of, but it is. First of all, what do you attribute that to? People will point the finger at certain things. Do you reflect on what that might be?
Well, I think it's a number of things. I think generally speaking, there's a kind of decline in corporate institutions in our country, and not just in our country, across the Western world. It's not just church attendance that's plummeted; political party attendance membership has plummeted a great deal. You get all kinds of those sort of intermediate institutions that sort of stand between the kind of the state and the individual. They've all declined pretty well. Pubs close at even faster rate than churches have in past years. So it's partly that. It's partly a sort of lack of trust in institutions, partly a kind of atrophying of our sort of civic life, the sense of our those local gatherings of things that held people together. So I think that's part of it. I think it's partly a kind of it's also partly a sort of growth of individualism within our culture, that we tend to think, well, I'm an autonomous individual, able to choose my own things. So church or anything else like that is not a sort of natural thing that you were part of. I think when I grew up, it was slightly more the sense that if you were kind of born into this country, well, you kind of the default position was you were part of a church. That's much less so, but that's also true of most other institutions like that. I think there's also stuff that the church has not always acted in a very kind of wise and caring way, and hasn't been a great kind of means of drawing people into Christian faith. So there's a number of sort of complex reasons to that. But I think there are broader sociological reasons as to why churches, alongside other kind of institutions like the church, have faded in time.
And you're I don't know many bishops that gave up their episcopacy, and I know you haven't in general terms, but
yeah.
You gave up the See of Kensington. Graham, was that a difficult decision, and why did you do that?
Well, it's an interesting one, Alex. And I've been Bishop of Kensington for 7 years, which is, and I love the job in many ways. It was a great part of the church to be in. You know, we were in West London, and the London diocese it's kind of unique in many ways in that we still have, broadly speaking, one priest, one parish. That's pretty unusual within the Church of England. A lot of resources there, so lots of stuff you can do there. But I think increasingly, as over time, I felt that while we were doing lots of really good things at local level, and I'm a great believer in the parish system in that sense, that we have a Christian presence in every community around the country. Very often at the kind of public level, it was hard to hear a kind of thoughtful, intelligent Christian voice. You know, the media tended to get interested in Christian faith when there was a fight or a scandal, you know, when we're arguing with each other, or when there's someone's done something terrible. But actually, the kind of rich, transformative Christian story that I kind of know in my heart has made a difference in my life, and you know, I kept on encountering people in churches with whom it had made a great difference. But actually, that story was not being told very well in kind of public life. And so, you know, I used to write a fair bit. I used to do the Credo column in the Times, wrote for various websites and articles and journals more publicly. And I found myself getting more and more interested in that kind of question. And I suppose the trigger for me was when the Church of England did a sort of 10-year vision thing, you know, you know, what's our vision for the 2020s? And I remember reading it through and thinking, well, there's some good, really good things here. You know, nothing wrong with it. Great. But there's nothing in it on the public witness of the church, how the church tells its story in public, how we make a case for Christian faith in public. So anyway, I wrote a little paper on it and sent it around to a few bishops and others, including both archbishops, saying, like, I think we ought to give attention to this. And they all said, you know, a kind of typical Anglican answer, which is, yeah, great idea. Yes, you're the person to do it. By the way, there's no money. And so I thought, okay, well, what can we do on this? Talk to various people. Came up with this idea of a new initiative that would focus on this public witness question. Managed to raise a bit of money, and so finally kind of took the jump. And it was a bit of a, as you say, I mean, starting something new is quite a risky business in some ways. But I felt increasingly it was a really important thing that we needed to do as a church, and it was something I felt a real call to, and so decided to make that move.
Probably a good time to tell people what that move was, Graham. So the Centre for Cultural Witness, tell us about that and what it does.
Yeah. Well, the Centre for Cultural Witness is about how do we retell the transformative Christian story in public, and how do we aim at a kind of renewal of the public understanding of Christian faith? Because I think, you know, we're in a country where you know, the church is well known, but very often is not well listened to. There was something came out a little while ago, a Church of England survey that so painted an image of the church that many people feel it's a bit like, you know, your elderly aunt who sort of sits in the corner of the living room, and you know, you're glad she's there. You don't want her to die or anything like that, but you probably don't pay a great deal of attention to her. You give her a cup of tea and a biscuit every now and again, but that's about it. And people think of the church a bit like that. You know, not that many real hardline Richard Dawkins type atheists around these days. Most people, they quite like the church, that it's there, but they don't pay any attention to it. And so I guess what we're about is how do we shift the dial from that to people thinking, actually, there's something in this that really I need to give proper attention to and to take quite seriously. So we're about that. So we do three main strands of what we do. The first is called what we call communication, where we run a kind of opinion website called seenandunseen.com, from that line in the creed, maker of all things, seen and unseen. And we put out articles, 1 or 2 new articles every day, some of which explaining aspects of Christian faith, much of which is sort of commenting on issues of the day, whether it's the Israel-Gaza war, or whether it's the cost of living crisis, or whether it's artificial intelligence, or kind of any cultural issues. But some of it is stories of the impact of Christian faith around the world. We do podcasts as part of that as well, and exploring sort of video resources and so on. So there's that communication side. There's a strand of it which is what we call leadership, which is offering training for, so for example, we did training recently for new bishops in the Church of England on their public role. Because when you become a bishop, suddenly people listen to you because you're a bishop. We're doing training for other groups and people, and also some emerging leaders as well, trying to help them think about how some younger clergy, early career academics, how do they engage in sort of public witness. And then we do some research questions as well, coming at this not from a perspective that we know how to do cultural witness, but how do we learn how to do that better? What kind of questions do we need to ask to enable the church to do that better? So that's kind of what we do as a Centre for Cultural Witness.
Yeah, it's really interesting listening to you tell us about that, because I come from the secular world. I didn't go into church till I was in my 40s, worked for Argos for 20 odd years. And one thing I feel sometimes is that we're very good at evangelizing to ourselves, and all our internal arguments and discussions, we like to think are kind of reaching the whole world. But, with recent events in Synod, I was actually surprised, or was I surprised, how little it was actually reported beyond the regular church times and the Guardian and people like that.
Yeah.
So do you feel you are reaching beyond the four walls of the institution?
Well, we're beginning to try to do that. And what we're trying to do is to do exactly that very thing. So one of the things we say to our writers, we've got a wide range of writers, some of them theologians, some of them clergy, some of them lay people, journalists, kind of quite a wide range of people. But we say to them, the number one rule is always write for the person outside the church. Don't write for the internal church audience. There are lots of websites out there that write for the church audience, and that's great. We kind of need that. But for this one, always have in mind the person outside the church. And that doesn't mean dumbing down your Christian faith. We are explicitly Christian. We're kind of unashamed about that. We're someone wanting to speak from within the church, as it were. But always addressing that person outside the church. That's actually quite a good discipline. I found that actually just trying to learn to do that myself when I write for the site. I'm not writing for a Christian audience. I'm writing for an audience outside the church. And part of the aim of that is to enable, obviously most people who read a site like this will have a faith already, and that's which is fine. And hopefully what they read will help them see how Christian faith relates to some of the issues that are going on in the world today. But also the kind of thing that you would feel quite easy passing on to a friend. So, for example, we've done an article recently on the Christian faith of Ludwig Beethoven. Now, you might think, okay, I'll read that. It's kind of interesting. But who do I know who likes Beethoven? I'll send that on to him. We don't want on Taylor Swift. You might want to. So the idea is to kind of, it's something that people who have a faith can both learn from themselves, but also use to pass on to other people to stimulate conversations and to enable people to see that Christian faith has got something quite distinctive to offer the rest of the world and open up a whole new view of reality.
And regarding Synod, Graham, I mean, it'd be very easy for me to follow the normal line, but most people inside the church know that there's a huge dispute and chasm between those who want to bless same-sex relationships and those who don't. But just to extend that discussion a bit further, because people in the church know that argument exists, and we could talk about that all day long. But beyond that discussion in itself, what is that saying to the outside of the walls? What is that saying to a society that has moved on? I was talking to Anderson Jeremiah about this, who's a theologian at Lancaster University, and he's saying that kids are different. They've moved now from being a place where they will be told what to think or what to believe to a place where they will question everything. So in that subject matter, what would your comment be?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it's something which, on the one hand, as you say, like you, I've been struck by sometimes how little it's reported outside the church, that it's as a kind of internal fight we're having that actually not that many people outside the church are interested in. I think the other thing I'd say about it is that like anything, the church has always had disputes and arguments amongst ourselves, and one of the things that we do within the site is, one of the things we try to avoid is to get involved in the internal conversations or the internal sort of fights that we have. But on the other hand, it seems to me that it is an opportunity to be able to talk to people outside the church on, well, why is there a fight going on in the church about it? Why do people feel so sort of passionately about it on one side or the other? And so whichever side you take of the debate, it gives you an opportunity to say, well, this is why I feel that we should or shouldn't bless same-sex couples. And that gives you an opportunity to talk about the real heart of Christian faith, because both sort of sides of the argument, I think, have their reasons as to why they take the view they do, that hopefully go back to the very heart of their understanding of Christian faith. And so therefore, in one sense, a positive way of looking at it is to think this gives you an opportunity to say, well, this is why I take the view I do, and this is where it's rooted in my own Christian faith. Now, that will be different for different people in the argument, but I think that's one way to think about it.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about is the role of a bishop. Yeah, if anybody's come in for a bit of a kicking over the last few weeks, it's been the bishops for being maybe described as well. There's been all sorts of suggestions and allegations and things thrown at them, but trying to be passively interested in this matter, it's almost a poison chalice, isn't it? Because if they say come out and say exactly what they think, they're potentially alienating a large number of priests and congregations in their own diocese. So the challenge of being a bishop is huge. How do you go about that? What is the pastoral direction we can offer our bishops?
Yeah, I remember when I became a bishop, people started calling me Bishop Graham, which is a bit of I'd look around, who are they talking to? Oh, it's me, And one of the things you kind of work out how to do when you're a bishop is how do I be bishop, and how do I be Graham, and how do I be Graham in a bishop way, and how do I be a bishop in a Graham kind of way? There is that interaction between the person and the office that you live with all the time as a bishop. And the same is true as a vicar, isn't it? When you're a local parish priest, you are the vicar and you're also Alex. So, you have to kind of navigate those two things. And I think and to an extent, it's an extension of something that's always been true for bishops. So when you become a bishop, every bishop comes from a particular part of the church. We've all got our traditions that we're part of, whether we're from sort of evangelical or Catholic or charismatic or liberal or whatever label you want to put on yourself. We all come from that. None of us come from sort of everywhere. We all have a kind of a part of the church that we come from. But when you become a bishop, you are a bishop for everybody, and you kind of have to adapt that. You have to learn ways in which other parts of the church think and operate, and try as much as you can to kind of enter into that. And so I think there's something like that going on at the same time with bishops, so that you're always working with this personal in relation to the office. And so I think it is possible. The thing has changed in the sense that in the past, I think bishops were much more reticent about expressing their opinion on issues like this, much more of a sense of bishops' collegiality, sort of staying quiet on it, on their personal views. Now I think it's much more public as to what bishops think. And maybe that's a good thing. It's a bit more honest, actually, that people may know where their bishops are. But I think just as, if you're an evangelical with a Catholic bishop, you kind of learn how to relate, or if you're a Catholic with an evangelical bishop, you kind of learn how to relate. Well, hopefully it can still be the case that even across difference, you can respect both the individual views of the bishop, but also their responsibility to care for the whole church, and the same the other way around, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And the last one on this one, Graham, how much do you worry about this matter? We've talked about churches falling out numerous times over the years. Is this potentially a very serious one?
Well, it could be if we don't get it right. I think it's quite important we do get it right, both in terms of working out a way forward for the issue itself, but also how we manage deep disagreements amongst us as a church. And we've done that in the past, and that's in some ways one of the geniuses of Anglicanism. It's been able to hold together quite deep differences across in the past, and it's going to be a real challenge to do this one well as well. So yeah, I do worry about it. Although at the same time, I don't worry about it in an ultimate sense. I do still profoundly believe this is God's church, not mine, not yours, not ours, and that He has His ways of somehow enabling the church to continue and to give its witness, and even in troubled times when it's not at peace with itself.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Something I really want to talk about. This interview is whizzing by. I want to ask you about housing. Because you've had serious connections with this, and obviously you were the Bishop of Kensington during the time of the Grenfell fire. First of all, Graham, on a personal level, how did that affect you?
It affected me quite profoundly in a lot of ways, really. I mean, one on In terms of my own role as Bishop of Kensington, it was a major part of what I was called to do, I think, at that time. It happened a year and a half into my time as Bishop of Kensington, and for the next 5 years or so, it was a key part of my kind of work and ministry, maintaining relationships with people in the local area, sort of speaking in public on that issue and trying to reflect upon it. It affects you in a personal way. I got to know some of the families who lost family members and stayed quite close to some of those families, and they're the kind of stories that are just heartbreaking when you hear them. And just still being with people whose lives are just never the same again since then. But it also made a big difference in that, again, as you say, the world of housing is not something I knew that much about beforehand, but got quite interested in it as a result of Grenfell, because it was one of the things that Grenfell shone a spotlight on, the kind of inequalities and problems of our housing market. And of course, that led to the Archbishop's Housing Commission, of which I was the vice chair. So those are, I guess, a number of the ways in which it really affected me, and it still does.
Yeah, and again, it's not the BBC, so I don't have to be balanced. But people may ask a bishop, where was the light in that darkness? Where was the hope in what had happened at Grenfell?
Yeah. Well, I think there were signs of. I mean, there was a lot of darkness in it, and there's a lot of darkness in the story. I mean, as the story has emerged through the public inquiry, it shone a light on some pretty dark places in our culture, in our ways of the ways in which we've done or haven't done building regulation, the ways in which companies have cut corners to make profits, the way in which that kind of profit motive has affected so much in our culture, and not far beyond housing, and actually was the heart of that tragedy. Having said that, there were things that emerged from it. So, for example, I can remember on those few days after the fire, that extraordinary outpouring of compassion and action and concern from not just the local community, but from the whole country. There were people driving down from the north of England to come and bring a suitcase full of clothing. Ironically, clothing was probably not what was needed in the middle of June when it was really, really hot. And a lot of the help that was given was probably, in one sense, not immediately needed, but it was just the outpouring of compassion was something that was quite remarkable to see. The sense of, and again, sense of people within the community in North Kensington that was quite divided in many ways, and some ways still remains that, but coming together in quite strong ways. One of the things that emerged out of it was a much closer relationship between different faith communities in North Kensington. I got to know the leader of the local Islamic cultural centre really well. He became a good friend, after that time. It's a relationship that I think there was a kind of multi-faith group that had fallen apart and hadn't really met for a long time, and that kind of brought it together. And my hope is that in the long term, that actually this will lead, as a result of the public inquiry, police investigation and everything else, that actually we will probably in 10, 15 years' time have a much healthier approach to housing safety and housing more generally in our culture than we had then. It's a very costly way to kind of get to that conclusion. But one of the stories I reflected on at the time was the story of where Jesus, where there's a story about the Tower of Siloam, where people go to Jesus and they say this tower has fallen down in Jerusalem and it's killed various people. Were they worse sinners than everybody else? And Jesus says, no, they weren't more sinners, but unless you repent, you also will die in your sins, which doesn't sound very sort of encouraging. But I think what it says is that when something like that happens, when a tragedy like that happens, it's an opportunity for kind of public repentance, to look at our way of life and think what's good, what's not so good about it, what do we need to change? And my kind of hope still, even 6 years after Grenfell, in some ways it's a short period of time in the long term working out of something like this, is that it will lead to a proper kind of public reckoning and repentance over the way we've done housing and a change in the way we do it.
Yeah, and kind of bringing that into 2023, Graham, and one of my frustrations with the synod is I do fundamentally think it gets in the way of mission and calling out injustice and matters that are incorrect, and working in an urban estate, I feel that very strongly. I interviewed Father Tom Saunder, who's the vicar at St Giles in the Field in London, and he was telling me that there are people in central London living in tents who are working, who are actually in jobs, and because they can't afford a property, they live in a tent. I was flabbergasted by that. I didn't think that was possible. That's what we should be calling out, isn't it, as a church?
Yeah, it seems to me that our housing market there's something very odd about it, where very few people in London, unless you qualify for social housing, it's almost impossible to get housing in central London unless you're on two reasonably good salaries, which again then raises questions about childcare, and most of your income goes on childcare and so on. And that can't be right. It's a situation where we've got, affordable housing basically means 80% of the market rate, which if the house is, if your average house in a street is still worth 2 million quid, that doesn't make it affordable for most people. So it seems to me our definitions have got completely out of sync here, especially when it comes to the inequalities of housing market across the country. Now, we came up with some sort of ways forward for that in our housing commission. Very difficult to get government to listen to housing commissions. They get reports all the time. But I think what we can do is begin to put our own house in order in the church. We're a major landowner across the church. We've got to do what we can to make sure that we use the resources we have to build properly affordable housing. And that's beginning to happen now, as a kind of witness to the way in which housing ought to work within our country.
Yeah, if anybody wants to look up the Gloucester Diocese website, there's some interesting stuff going on in there. Bishop Graham, it's been lovely chatting to you. We haven't really talked about the footy. You're a long-suffering Bristol City supporter. How's things going this year?
Well, we just lost a manager. We're mid-table. We've been mid-table in the Championship for the last 5 years, just about. We don't go up, we don't go down. It's a bit dull, but anyway, it's better than football supporting. Most 98% disappointment, the odd moment of absolute utter joy.
Yeah.
But we continue. We hope for the best. Burnley are doing all right. You're doing okay.
Yeah, we're at the bottom of the Prem, but it's nice being in the Prem. I keep saying to those who are moaning, look, we could be in Division 4 where we were once upon a time, and they are not nice places to be when you're a reasonably big club as we are. And
well, we've been down there too, but we still wait for the promised land one day. It's taught me a lot about hope and loyalty and mistakes and everything else. I learned a lot from being a football fan over the years.
Yeah. So Graham, if you just finish by signposting people to the centre for cultural witness, just tell people how they can find you.
Yeah, well, you can find more about Centre for Cultural Witness on culturalwitness.org. That tells you about the organisation more generally. But the main place to go is our kind of the website seenandunseen.com, where you'll find lots of really interesting, hopefully, I think really well written articles by a wide range of people giving. The strapline is Christian perspectives on just about everything, and hopefully you'll find some really interesting material on there which you'll find stimulating and thought provoking, and again, things you can pass on to others as well.
Fabulous. Anybody who is watching or listening, I'll put the link in the comment section so people can just click on and search you out there. Bishop Graham, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Alex. Really good to chat to you.
Send our love from Lancashire, and wish all the best to you down in the south of England. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. God bless. Bye-bye.